the matter is that the ruling party doesn't have in its constitution that in order to lead, you must have a particular qualification that says you need to have standard 2. I mean standard 10. There is nothing like that in the African, in the constitution of the African National Congress. So at some stage, some issues we have to live with, but the African National Congress is an organization that is aware through its research at the very same time about the issues that are being raised here. And that is the reason why they have decided to introduce the community development program. On my conclusion, after this particular session, after there have been responses and questions, I am prepared to forward to this particular audience the direct conduct of the CDW program in Gauteng, which is a corner commissioner and Sawa Street here in Johannesburg. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Renata,
yes, I wanted to ask, when you did your research, did you also come across at least some positive results? So did you find also individuals working in this area on that level who did their job? Oh, sorry. Should I repeat my question? I just wanted to find out whether you also came across some positive results. Did you find individuals or institutions on the local level where things worked, where these people were sticking to the regulations and to democratic rules?
All right. I'll start in no particular order, but we'll try to group the questions instead of answering them individually. I think if CDWs are working exceptionally well in Gauteng, then Gauteng is an exception. Because CDWs elsewhere in the country are not functioning, partly because the councillors felt threatened by CDWs. There was a sense that CDWs are now posturing and wanting to be councillors. And this has to do with how councillors perceive their job or interpret their job. Councillors insist on being the only ones visible in that ward, because visibility means higher prospects for re-election. So, they're increasingly encroaching into the responsibilities that were assigned to CDWs, because they thought CDWs were getting more credit for what they should be doing. And this is the problem, really, because you don't want, of course you don't want, this is a democracy. You don't want to be led by entirely or exclusively by educated people. We've had one educated president here, and unfortunately he thought he knew more than everyone else. And that was the problem. So you don't want, because uneducated as they may be, they bring a certain insight about the lives of their people. They are people's representatives. That's what democracy is all about. But the problem is not so much their lack of qualifications, and I raised the issue not to highlight that point, but I was making a different point. The problem really is that they then insist on being hands-on. They promise jobs, they want to do all sorts of things for which they have no qualifications. And this is the tension between councillors and officials, is that councillors go all over the place, make all sorts of promises, they want to redirect or change budgets and plans on stuff they have no clue about. Because they want visibility. Again, visibility is good for them for re-election. After all, their main thing is that they've been elected to create jobs. That's what they believe. First day in office, create jobs. I must go back to my people and say, I've delivered. This is my delivery. So this delivery mentality is leading to them distorting what they are meant to do. So it's not about qualifications, really. It's about how they appreciate and do their jobs. And so you can't insist on qualifications, Mike, and say, well, if you don't have standard 10, then you can't be elected, because that's what democracy is all about. I'm not sure if the growth path, I don't want to discuss the growth path, that's another discussion. But safe to say that we do need strategies that speak essentially to the needs of poor people. The idea of cooperatives. People all over the show have been encouraged to create cooperatives with the idea that they will take advantages of whatever local development issues are emerging. And in fact, Gauteng Joburg started an initiative just recently, which for some reason the councillors don't seem to understand, which is that if you need a park to be mowed, for instance, to be cleaned, instead of getting a company, a formal company, you can encourage local folks there to get together to clean, and you give them a stipend, you give them something. So this is one way of creating employment, something that is happening here in Johannesburg. So don't use huge established companies for little things that local people can do. That creates some opportunities for livelihood, and secondly, it gets people involved. It creates a sense of ownership within their own communities. And for me, this is one of the positive things that we saw, especially in Patronage, where you have women who are involved in cooperatives and trying to make a living instead of resigning themselves to their problems. In Mhlonhlo, an interesting thing was that the much hated traditional leadership institution is making a comeback in that community, because they say the chief is a lot more inclusive than the councillor, because the councillor is pushing politics of factionalism, whereas the chief cares for the entire village. And what they do, for instance, still on the positive side, is that when they have to decide who should get a job in a particular project, they decide on the basis of need. Which family is most desperate? Which family is most in need of income? Then the chief decides who should get that. And people have a say in that. So these jobs, especially the projects where the chiefs are centrally involved, they insist on that, and people are increasingly developing a preference for much greater involvement by the chieftaincy in local development issues over councillors, because councillors use developmental projects to create power bases to the exclusion of others, whereas the chiefs are seen to be a lot more just.
Thanks, Chief. I think that last comment was particularly interesting, because of course chiefs are not subject to the elections of democracy, so it raises a set of very interesting questions. Can I have more hands? Yeah, I mean, I've got lots of hands. Okay, Jane, you had your hand up. Right, okay, I've noted all the hands, more or less, where they are. Jane first.
Thanks. Jane Barrett from COSATU. My question really is a follow-on, and I was hoping you might answer it specifically, but if I could rephrase the question that was asked previously, and that is, in the case studies, did you have examples of councillors, either independents or within the ruling party or any parties, who came in with idealism and managed in any way to stand their ground? What happens to those people? What is the story there? Is there, you made a number of recommendations. I mean, obviously it requires on the ground some people within these institutions to take a stand. But what's the story that your research tells about what happens to those people?
Hello. In your recommendation, you advise to fix the party, to fix civil society, but I don't see a lot of reflection on fixing the state and challenging the way it functions. Are you giving up on it? And let me play for a moment the devil's advocate and talk for councillors, because I think they're being not only powerless but systematically disempowered. Disempowered, for instance, for what boundaries change all the time. You can't build a community And it's not a surprise that nobody knows what a ward is when suburbs and communities are cut across by ward boundaries for different reasons. The place they have in councils, and I'm talking from Johannesburg, which is indeed an exception. I think it doesn't function quite the same way in small municipalities. But councillors have absolutely no way of bringing things up to the council and discuss what issues they're encountering on the ground. And CDWs are a way to fix councillors without investing in them and actually creating competition. And I'm not surprised that there is a lot of tension between the two, because CDWs are in effect competing with politicians whose job is to be re-elected. This is the nature of democracy. So I'd like some reflection around councillors, and I think they resort to what they do to clientelistic politics. Also because they have no other resources to distribute and to put up for public debates. They have nothing to propose.
Yeah, Mr. Beret there in the middle.
Thanks very much. My name is
Oh, it's not yet? Oh, okay.
It's not yet. At the risk of being ridiculous, I think I must wish you happy Valentine.
Thank you. Same to you.
Yes, because the revolutionaries needs love as well. That's why Kosato and the party are red. Yeah. But nonetheless, I want to build on I understand and appreciate the focus on local governments. But patronage politics is much broader. And surely you'll agree with me that this is not exclusively a problem of local governments. And therefore I want to bring, because I wanted to lead to the issue of giving up on the state. How do we fix the state? I don't want to fix the state, but how do we change how the states function to make it better, effective, and deliver more about what is needed on the ground. The link, did you perhaps find any link without taking you away from your focus, specific research? The role of the media, the role of the other influential, institutions that themselves faces patronage politics. Is this exclusively something that's the courts, for example? If you say people are fighting in meetings, in the council meetings or in party meetings, how does this extend to the other arms of the state? Or how does this impact positively or negatively on how the courts functions, how the media exposes some of these things, and perhaps patronage politics itself, and perhaps do they only divide the party and the councils, or the divisions extends, and I've heard to explicitly say they divide society, and the chiefs are now coming in to rescue the divisions in communities. But do this, or could this perhaps also divide the courts or the reporters? I don't know.
Thank you, Carl. I'm Somabile from SWOP. Just two quick questions. I think this is a very interesting research. But I'm interested to know, one, did the socio-economic landscapes in which these municipalities are located, did it have any impact on the findings? Did you see any variations? And secondly, the question of the party. I don't know, were these municipalities all under the ANC? I'll be interested to see if there would be any differences had they been under different political parties, or the role rather of opposition in this patronage politics, if you had spotted any. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, well, Mcebisi, if you can deal with it, but sort of almost cherry pick. You can't deal with everything.
The state, we cannot give up on the state. I think, especially the local government state, because that's where people really get in contact with the state. To them, that is the state. Especially for me, in relation to development. Part of the reason why we have such discontent is because nothing is happening in these communities. The only claim that councillors can have is is that the road has been repaired, or the very little stuff that they can gloat about. So if you were to create a lot more, prioritize communities and prioritize local development and get the cooperatives involved in this developmental stuff. And part of the problem, of course, is that most people who do this development are established big companies, the patrons who control the councillors. Those are the ones who are involved in this thing. So yes, no, we did not give up on it. We need to prioritize, especially local government. And I'm glad to hear that the ruling party is saying retired former MPs or even presidents might be deployed to local government. I'm not sure if the current one might want to do that, but anyway. And patronage extends to all sorts of places. It's not just confined within a local space. And we find that in the media, for instance. I mean, I think the Guptas are famous patrons. They are handlers. And that is why in every government public meeting you see the New Age. They only distributed newspaper there. And that is why they have preferential treatment by government departments and even the SAPC, because they handle the president. They are the president as benefactors. So patronage happens. It's not just there. It's all over the place. I'm afraid we didn't find